and thanks for watching. I'm Rachel Kirkland with WashingtonExec, and I'm speaking once again with Mary Abbajay. She is the author of the best-selling book, Managing Up: How to Move Up, Win at Work, and Succeed with Any Type of Boss. She is also the president of Careerstone Group, which provides talent and organizational development solutions to business and government. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh my goodness, Rachel, it's so nice to see you. I don't think I've seen you for a couple of years. How's life?
It's busy, as I'm sure it is with you.
Yeah,
I want
it
to
is.
go
But you know
back.
what? It's better to be busy than not busy, right?
I agree. I agree. As I was preparing for this interview, I was curious what inspired you to specialize in leadership and workplace communication?
Well, I'm gonna think if I can answer that in a short way, and with not a way that's too like schmaltzy. But the truth is, I really like to help people, and I really want people to have the most productive and positive work experience possible. Because I don't know about you, but many of us, especially in the Washington area, we spend a lot of our waking hours at work, and I really want to help people make those hours great hours, hours where they can add value, hours where they can be valued, hours where they can use their heart, their mind, their creativity, like hours where they can contribute back. And so when I was looking through my vast career, one of the things that always stuck out for me was how people had difficulty managing their workplace relationships. And the workplace is a social system, right? So that means we have to work with other people. We have to work around other people. And so I found it really interesting and valuable to help people really kind of strengthen that aspect of their life, especially when you're talking about people who are difficult to work with. For years I heard bosses complain about their employees. Oh, they don't do this, they don't do that, blah, blah, blah. And oh my goodness, the people that complained about their bosses constantly, like my boss should do that and my boss needs to do this. And I just kept thinking, people, why don't you just have a conversation? Why don't you just work it out? It's not rocket science to really figure out what you can do more of, less of, or differently to work well with somebody. So that's really where it started from, was trying to help people make better workplace relationships so they could have a better workplace experience so they could have a better life.
As you mentioned, it's been a few years since we talked. Last time I interviewed you was in summer of 2021, and we were discussing your book. What's new for you in 2024, and what are you focusing on these days?
Well, there's a couple of things I'm really interested in focusing on, and I'm working with a lot of my clients on. One of them is the toxic workplace. So the toxic boss. So I've been doing a lot of research on toxicity and what it looks like. And the statistics are really kind of disheartening. I'm sure you read in the paper every day, you read about some famous toxic boss, but there's a lot of not famous toxic bosses out there ruining everybody's workplace experience. So, I really want people to understand that if they're working in a toxic relationship or for a toxic boss, that chances are nobody's coming to save them, right? And they have to really save themselves. And that the dangers of working for a toxic boss or a toxic workplace culture are pretty astounding. It's going to decimate your immune system, making you much more likely to be sick. It's going to actually impact your cardiac fitness. So studies have shown that people that work in toxic situations are 60% more likely to encounter stroke or cardiac incidences. And it also decimates your psychological health and your mental health. There are some mental health professionals that compare this to toxic um, battered spouse syndrome and PTSD. Gosh, it's Friday. I'm turning all over my words. And so I want people to realize that if they're working for a toxic boss or a toxic situation, they really need to get themselves out, because it can take multiple years, up to 2 to 5 years, to actually recover physically and mentally from that situation. And there's a lot of toxic situations in what we call high meaning careers, like law, politics, government, and healthcare. And so I'm really working to help spread the word that people do not have to live in a toxic regime, that they have choices. And the other thing I'm working on, which is completely different, is talking about personal branding, helping people understand how to take control of their brand, to take control of their reputation, how to be able to self-promote and self-advocate a little bit. So those are the two things I've been really working on a lot in this past year or so. I know they seem very different, but there are some ways where they're connected.
I can see that. So, I wanted to discuss some of the quote unquote managing up techniques that you're helping people apply in this post pandemic world. Can you talk about how that relates to hybrid and remote work?
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, I think, in some ways it might be easier in remote work, depending on the type of boss you have. And some ways it might be harder. So I think the key to success in a hybrid or a remote situation is by making putting some concerted attention and intention behind how you are going to navigate your relationships. So I have three big areas that I think people really want to focus on. Number one is the staying connected. This means really making that extra effort to stay connected with, if we're talking about your bosses, with your boss, really checking in, making sure that communication is clear and that your modes of communication are very clear. I really recommend that people have a granular conversation with their bosses around how we're going to make this hybrid or remote thing work. Don't just rely on the policy. Well, the policy says I can work 3 days from home, so I'm going to pick my 3 days. Yeah, you could, or you could have a conversation with your boss around what 3 days would work the best. What's our mode of communication when I'm not in the office? What days are you working in the office? So really digging into people's needs, wants, expectations, preferences, and pet peeves around the hybrid workplace. So for example, if your boss is a big emailer, then when you are hybrid or remote that day, you need to be checking your email, right? So you want to make sure that you are building that trust and that connectivity. That's number one. Number two is I recommend people try to understand their workplace persona and their boss's workplace persona, especially in the hybrid. So, for example, some people are what we call office cravers, meaning they really like to be in the office. That's where their jam is. Maybe they're command and control people, but whatever. They like a physical office and they like to be in that office. Some people are what we call mixers, and these are people like to mix it up. I'll work from the office one day, I'll work from Starbucks another day, I'll work from home another day. And mixers tend to be about 74% of the workforce. Office cravers tend to be about 10%. And then we have home dwellers, right? And these are the people that don't ever see any need to ever go into the office again. So it's really important to take a look at what your persona is. And they're about 10% of the workforce as well, 12%. And so it's really important to take a good look at what your persona is and what your boss's persona is. And then take some time to really think about what could I do more of, less of, or differently to really, adapt to their way of being and have them understand my way of being. Don't resist what they are, but adapt to it. So if I know that my boss is an office craver, then I'm going to make a point of when I come into the office to make sure he, she, or they see me in the office and connect with them. Which brings me to my third big tip for making hybrid or remote work. And that is simply to show your face. Whether it's physically in the office or whether it's when you're doing video work or meetings, what we want to avoid is what's called presence bias, which is where we tend to give bias to people who we see. And so that might be people that we see physically in the office, or that might be people that we see on camera on the lens. So be strategic about when you show your face or when you show up physically in the office. You might want to align that to the days your boss is there. You might want to align it to the days where there's other important stakeholders in the office, or when there's big projects announced, or there's something happening in the office. So really put some attention and intention around how you are showing up, when you are showing up, and where you are showing up. And then my last fourth thing, even though I know I said I had three, and that is do a regular check-in with your boss around the hybrid and remote work. For many organizations, hybrid is still sort of an experiment. We're still sort of figuring it out. So I would recommend sitting down with my boss every 3 months or so, or every quarter, and saying, hey, so how's this hybrid thing working for you? What's working well with our hybrid situation? What's not working so well? And what what are some things we or I might do a little more of, a little less of, a little differently to really make this hybrid work for everybody?
Fantastic. I want to jump to a completely different topic, and that is AI. So, you've posted some about this, about how AI can actually help us build better relationships up, down, across. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so AI is still kind of an unknown, right? And it's coming, it feels like all of a sudden it's a fire hose of information. So we and my company and myself, we're still trying to figure out like how this is going to play in our area. And I'm doing a webinar with an AI expert in the next week or so, and we're going to play with this around how AI can help you with managing up and managing your workplace relationships. So where I think the starting point is going to be is I think it could be a really good tool for people, for example, when they are dealing with somebody who works differently than they do, or they have come a fractured relationship, or they're just not understanding the different communication style. I think AI could be a great tool to like AI that, like, so, dear AI, dear chat GPT, how do I deal with a micromanager? And I think, and I've tried this, of course, and chat GPT or the AI can actually give you some really interesting, at least starting points, pieces of advice, so I think it's going to be a good starting point for that. And I know, that workplace relationships are more of an art than a science. So I don't want to say that it's going to be the end all be all, but I think it could help open people's perspectives and open their minds about different strategies that they can try when they're working with people whom they don't really understand or who are annoying to them or just work or communicate differently. I will also say that there are some new tools I've been seeing that are very interesting. There's this one, and I think it's called Clover. And what it is people sort of upload, let's say their Myers-Briggs, or they upload their DISC report or some personality profile. And when you have a meeting with them, Clover, I think it's called Clover, will send you a little note saying, well, remember, Rachel's an introvert. So make sure you give her, when you meet with her, make sure you give her space to talk, blah, blah, blah. So I think there's we're just at the very beginning of what AI can do. So I am, like everybody, really curious and interested, a little fearful about how AI is going to work in helping human beings work better with other human beings.
Very interesting.
It's really interesting and a little scary, Rachel. It might be putting me out of the job. Next time you interview me, it might be Chat GPT, a hologram of me.
Oh, we'll have to see about that one.
I know, right?
Um, so my last question for you, as many are aware, March is Women's History Month. The theme for this year is Women Who Advocate for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. What advice would you have for women who wish to advocate more for themselves or for others in the workplace?
Oh, such a great question. And how much time do we have? I'm going to give you just a couple ideas. So I think it also depends on where you are in your career, but wherever you are in your career, I think women need to really, really embrace the notion that the workplace is not a meritocracy. Just doing great work is not going to be enough. It's what you have to do great work, absolutely, but that's not necessarily going to get you to the next project or to the next challenge or to the next rung on the ladder. It's really about women have to advocate for themselves. So a couple tips to do that. And really they have to advocate for themselves, and they have to really advocate for other women. We are not where we need to be yet as a segment of, as a demographic part of the population. So a couple things: raise your hand. Volunteer for the tough projects. Volunteer to sit on different committees. Volunteer to take on projects that nobody wants to take on. So raise your hand. Don't wait to be asked. If you see an opportunity or you see a project you want to work on, volunteer. Say that you want it. Go after things you want to go after. Don't wait for things to come to you. Go after them. Take your space. And what I mean by that is, like, when you're in a meeting, speak up. And these are really silly, sounds really silly, but these make a difference. Like, if you're going to be in a meeting, a physical meeting room, and there's a conference table, sit at the table. Don't give your seat up to somebody outside the table. Because if you're not at the table, you're not at a table. So really take your space. Do not be afraid to speak up. If someone starts speaking over you, just raise your hand and say, excuse me, me, I'm not quite finished. Let me finish and then we'll go to you. Like, you have to do that. You got to stick up for yourself. Definitely start, and this is really important for young women earlier in their career. You want to start to form alliances, not politically speaking, but you want to build your network, and you've got to build alliances. And you also want to be an ally. And this is for the older women or us more seasoned. Be a good ally. Help bring other voices to the table that aren't being heard. Really be that person that really looks for the best idea and not just the person that's just like them. So be an ally and make sure you power up your alliances. Get comfortable with a little self-promotion. I call it, Rachel, shameless self-promotion. And what I mean by that is learning how to promote yourself without feeling ashamed. Women tend to be much more humble about their accomplishments, which is fine, but they also tend to be very quiet about their accomplishments. So make sure that you are able to talk about what you've accomplished. You're able to talk about your strengths. You're able to say, oh yeah, I can do that. You are showing your confidence, and people know what you are capable of. Don't expect them to just learn it from the grapevine. Don't be afraid to talk about what you've accomplished. And that also means when we talk about managing up, making sure that your boss is aware of your accomplishments. We expect our bosses to know everything about us and everything that we've done, and they don't. So next time you get a compliment from a client or a customer or a stakeholder, pass it on to your boss and say, oh my goodness, this was so nice, blah, blah, blah. Self-promote yourself. And finally, my last tip for women is this. Don't wait until you have 100% of the qualifications, the skills, the experience to apply for a new opportunity before you do. Research shows that women wait until they have 95% of what the project says it needs or the job says it needs before they apply, where men usually have less than 50%. So don't take yourself out of the running for things because you're not 100% there. Nobody necessarily expects you to. What people want to see in you is that you have confidence that whatever skill or set you're missing or experience, that you are going to learn it and you are going to be able to take on that challenge and excel with it. So those are my tips for women who want to advocate for themselves and others more in the workplace. Just got to do it. Raise your
Fantastic.
hands. Use your voice.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for coming on and talking with me today.
It was super fun.